Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon and welcome to our new Innovations webinar series, Another Way to Get From Here to There. My name is Ryan Brumfield. I'm with the Integrated Mobility Division at NCDOT and I'll be moderating today's session. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Because we have such a large audience today, we have everyone muted in listen-only mode for now. If you have questions during the presentation, please add them to the chat box and we'll be sure to address them before the end of the session. We will have breaks in between each presentation for questions and then time at the end for Q&A. Following today's webinar, you will receive a survey and we would really appreciate your feedback and hope you can take the time to fill that out. We want these events to be beneficial to you, and so we welcome your input, suggestions, and ideas for future sessions. We've also established a website for this webinar series, and we'll be making some updates to that, but we do have the website, at least initially, set up, and I think Blair will be sharing a link to that in the chat pod, so you can access the current web page through that link, which includes details on upcoming webinars, and we'll also be posting the recordings and slide deck from today's session on that website. We have a great agenda planned for today featuring the City of Wilson and VIA, who will discuss their new microtransit project. We also have Sahar Shirazi with WSP with us to share a national perspective on emerging mobility trends and the growing use of microtransit in transit systems around the country. But first, we have a special presentation from Julie White, Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation at NCDOT. She's going to share more about our new Integrated Mobility Division, the merger that combined the Public Transportation Division and the Bike and Ped divisions, and our vision for innovation within the new division and how this webinar series fits into that vision. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Julie.
Great, thanks, Ryan. I am absolutely tickled to be kicking off this webinar series with everyone today. We had phenomenal registration for this. We didn't expect to see such large numbers, so I want to thank everybody for tuning in. When I looked through the RSVPs, what a diverse audience we have today of interest. From our transit systems to cities and counties, planners, RPOs and MPOs, our division engineers, our in-house DOT teams. Thank you so much for participating in this today as we kick off the series where we spend time thinking and learning about how our transportation system is changing, and per our title, another way to get from here to there. So thinking beyond just the automobile, but in the whole transportation network. So I'm going to talk to you about how we are looking at the landscape of mobility in DOT and how it's changing and how the needs of our network are evolving. And that requires visionary leadership from our North Carolina DOT, including their strategic leadership in piloting and deploying new mobility solutions and providing guidance to our partners across the state in new mobility solutions. And that is really what led to the idea of the Integrated Mobility Division. This division's mission is to provide leadership for safe, affordable, and innovative multimodal transportation throughout North Carolina. And the way we formed this division, and Ryan's advancing my slides for me, so I should say advanced slide, is that we took our 3 modes and put them into one division: our bicycle, our pedestrian, and our transit systems all into one shop. And we did this because we wanted to enhance the ease and appeal of the overall transportation system by providing first and last mile solutions and increasing system connectivity through the pairing of transit systems with active mobility options such as walking and biking. Because after all, every trip starts as a pedestrian trip. We wanted to increase access to destinations and provide opportunities for increased economic activity through emerging mobility options. And we wanted to respond to user needs through the use of emerging technologies and partnerships. We wanted to position ourselves to react to the emergence of automated vehicles and innovative mobility options such as e-scooters, bike share, and ride sourcing services. And importantly, we wanted to ensure equitable distribution of services that are right-sized and accessible to all and economically efficient for both public and private partners. We want to address the regional mobility needs through the integration and regionalization of program structure and strengthen coordination and collaboration between regional planning organizations and transit systems. And of course, we wanted to leverage our financial and administrative resources towards all these goals. Advanced slide. So you can see our new division's focus and vision lie in 6 buckets: personal mobility, land use connections, innovations and pilots, integration, community vibrancy, and rural and urban needs. We had 2 independent strategic plans before the merger, and so we used this opportunity to examine those and how they could be synthesized into one strategic plan around this new concept. So you can see where we're spending our time looking at our combined strengths and goal areas, including mobility planning and policy, integrated multimodal services, delivering the department's complete streets policies. We want to be a high-performing division. We want to be effective in our grants and compliance. And then this is where the smart mobility and innovation opportunities lie. And so our organizational chart is new. If you don't know our team, get to know our leadership team. Our interim director is Heather Hildebrandt. She came to us on loan from the Transportation Planning Division. She's a super engineer and doing a great job leading us. And then we have 3 branches in this newly formed division. We have our planning and programming branch with John Vine Hodge at the leadership, our finance and compliance branch, which is vacant, and we'll be posting that position shortly, and our safety and innovation and data branch, which is Ryan, that opened this session and that owns this webinar series. And we're excited to have Ryan as a new member of our team. He comes to us from the FHWA side. Advanced slide. So the planning and programming vision is we had something in our transit system called mobility development specialists. And on the bicycle and pedestrian side of the house, we had bicycle and pedestrian planners, and we're merging those 2 jobs into one so that we have multimodal planners. And what really struck me when I started to think about the need for this merger was when watching a mother get off a bus on a bus stop with a stroller and a toddler, and there was no sidewalk on the side of the street where her bus stop was. And then I watched her with no nearby crosswalk or street light run across a 4-lane, 45-mile-an-hour road to the other side where the sidewalk was with the toddler and the stroller. And it got me thinking about the fact that we were planning for these modes separately and distinctly. And so by having multimodal planners, we'll have a better integration of those different and various needs of the whole trip. And then you can see we're going to divide the state into a Western planning unit and an Eastern planning unit, and then we'll have a group of people that'll focus on statewide grants and program administration. Particularly today, I want to talk about the safety and innovation and data branch because they are the branch that are leading this webinar series, another way to get from here to there. They are focused in transit, bike, and pedestrian safety and education and training. They're working on our innovation pilots, and we're going to talk about a couple of those in this talk. They're focused on data collection and analysis, as data is playing a bigger role in our lives as state government than ever before, and in our research studies unit. So advanced slide. One of our big new pilots, if you haven't heard about it, is our project we call CASSI, which is our Connected Autonomous Shuttle Supporting Innovation. If you know anything about DOT, it's that we love acronyms. So this is our CASSI. She is our autonomous shuttle. We launched her both at our Transportation Summit last year, and then again on NC State's campus pre-COVID. She is a fully autonomous shuttle. We had a great amount we could learn by having an autonomous shuttle interact with our infrastructure, interact on our roads, so we could learn as we're building out our network how to prepare for the future. Because of COVID, CASSI is in storage right now, but we're making plans to bring CASSI back out hopefully this spring as we continue to see how things progress with the virus. Advanced slide. Another pilot we're working on is our Mobility for All pilot in Northeastern North Carolina. We are very excited to have worked with our partners to secure a $280,000 FTA grant. The purpose is to link transit trip scheduling with the NC Care 360 platform to improve healthcare access. It'll include testing of other technologies like contactless fare payment and real-time bus tracking. This is one of the spaces that we see a lot of opportunity for the Integrated Mobility Division to help secure grants to do these pilots. Our team has become extremely talented at winning federal grants, and that, in fact, is going to be part of our Wilson story. So wanted to highlight that pilot. Advance. And then another of our pilots and another grant opportunity is we are currently pursuing an FTA Transit-Oriented Development Planning Grant for our S-Line rail project. The Integrated Mobility Division is applying for the grant funding so that we can do corridor-wide transit-oriented development planning. Community partners are providing the local match and strong support. We had about 2 weeks to get this grant ready and submit it. We're getting ready to submit it on Friday. And we've gotten commitments to date of $290,000 worth of local match from cities along this corridor, putting skin in the game on this grant. And I think that speaks very much to their enthusiasm and excitement about doing corridor-wide planning around future rail projects. You can see a map there of the S-Line. We are working in our rail division to purchase our portion of the S-Line from CSX, and then looking at standing up passenger rail in that corridor in short order. Advanced slide. So today, that brings us to our case study today of the city of Wilson. And what is really, I think, exciting about this story is in the partnership that we've built with Wilson and with VIA. When Wilson approached us, called us up and said, we have this unusual idea, this kind of creative idea that we'd like to do. Can you help us figure out how we do it within all of the various regulatory and policy rules around transit? And we said, yes, absolutely, we want to help and support you. And we think there's a grant opportunity out there that could let you grow this even more. And how about we put together that grant application? So what Wilson had identified was that their economic center had shifted, and it took the jobs with it. That the city's decades-old fixed route system no longer was providing the right service for their riders. I remember when Roger said to me, you know, a lot of our major employers are manufacturing, and manufacturing isn't in a downtown, in an urban center. It isn't where our fixed route goes, and that's where people need to go. So what they've done that's so exciting is they've replaced those fixed routes with rides on demand service. It provides reliable transportation to job sites and healthcare by both expanding coverage and reducing wait times. They're serving riders who are unbanked and or without access to smartphones by accepting payment through prepaid vouchers and offering both online and phone bookings. And they're investing in TransTech through FTA 5311 funds and a competitive FTA AIM grant, as well as city and state funding. We'll of course talk more about that shortly. One other initiative we wanted to be sure and share with everyone is our NC Cares effort. As COVID started, it was really important to us to figure out what kind of additional support we could provide the state's transit systems. And So we set up this NC Transit Cares initiative. We did surveys, we did virtual meetings. Early on, I was so impressed with our team, hosted 100 transit systems via an online platform with breakout groups. Early on in this COVID, that was a real feat. I still think it's a real feat at this time, but it was incredibly impressive how they did this. And they gathered information from our systems about what were the challenges that they were facing and what did they need to be able to respond and recover, and then long-term deal with some of these innovative opportunities. So they developed strategies and innovations which are helping our systems become more resilient and able to handle future disruptions. And they're identifying products and projects and policy changes which will help our transit systems respond to COVID and prepare for the long-term challenges. They identified 4 key solution areas: keeping passengers and employees safe and healthy, increasing and maintaining ridership levels, and restoring revenue and funding loss due to COVID-19, and then moving to new service models as our needs evolve. So that's a little bit about our merger that we wanted to share with you all and where we're headed in the future. This webinar series is to give you an opportunity monthly to hear some of the most cutting edge things that are happening in multimodalism. Wanted to highlight our next couple that are scheduled so that you can get registered for them. Our November one will be on the bicycle and pedestrian explosion in COVID. We have a research project with some of our partners that have been tracking bicycle and pedestrian use in North Carolina, and the data is absolutely overwhelming of the number of people who are getting out and using these facilities like never before. So I think we're gonna have some really great information to share with y'all with that one. And that feeds really well into our December topic of non-motorized policies and programs. How are we doing as a state, and how do we compare with other states? And then in January, a great presentation on the Charlotte Gateway Station. Charlotte is doing a P3 to develop an iconic multimodal station, and we're going to talk to everyone about how you can build an iconic multimodal station at any scale and any size community. So please go ahead and register for those. When you get your evaluation from this, we're going to have an opportunity for you to tell us what kind of topics you'd like to hear more about so we can build out future agendas. So we hope that you'll respond to that and give us some good ideas. Ryan, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So let me move on to the next slide here. So thanks again, Julie, for that great opening and presentation. So today's topic again is about the Wilson Microtransit project. We do have a presentation prior to that from Sahar Shirazi with WSP to kind of set the stage from a national perspective. So we have a few speakers. Sahar is going to go first, and then we also have Roger Linson Jones from the city of Wilson, and Olivia Blayhut and Rachel Brinbaum from VIA to talk about their experience in Wilson. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sahar, and just bear with us a second while we switch slides. So Sahar, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Great, thank you. Just 1 second, sorry, y'all. All right, is that working out?
Yep, that's good.
Great. So thank you for having me, guys. It's really exciting and really well timed. I think microtransit is a growing solution for various use cases around the country, and we've seen it similar to bikes and micromobility explode a bit as COVID has changed a lot of our needs and travel patterns around the country. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the state of the industry, a couple of different use cases that are being tested out in various places, as well as some considerations as you move forward into thinking about complementing programs with microtransit. So first, what is microtransit for anyone who doesn't know? A lot of innovative technology is traditional modes that we've used, but updated with new technologies. So if you think of former sort of van pool programs or shuttle buses that were operated by smaller communities in the past, it's a similar style. However, it's technology enabled, meaning there's usually either an app or an option to make phone calls or go online to reserve the vehicles. They're often done with private partnerships, similar to what the City of Wilson is doing with VIA, which is one of the big microtransit providers. They tend to be a little bit smaller scale in terms of vehicles than the traditional big buses. Right now, in fact, many of the microtransit programs are operating with not private vehicles, but small personal sized vehicles through things like similar to Uber and Lyft. And then there's many that have vans or smaller shuttle buses. They can be either fixed route or flexible route within a service area, and they can also operate either with a fixed schedule or an on-demand. Most of the ones we're seeing now do have on-demand capabilities and are being used that way, but they can be transferred over to fixed schedules if that makes sense in the future. So some of the use cases that we have seen emerging, especially prior to COVID, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of this about how COVID is shifting this dynamic a bit. But one of the main ones is the first and last mile connections. This works really well in urban or suburban areas where there are existing transit services, whether they be light rail or high occupancy bus vehicles. But then people may live a little farther away than they're comfortable walking or biking. Same with the last mile where you're going to employment centers or service centers. Similarly, you might need a little extra help with that last bit. So we're seeing a lot of these as connections to existing fixed route transit systems, but they're also often being used for short trips. So in a sense, replacing transit, but what we're seeing with the data is that they're actually being utilized for trips that people wouldn't make in the past. So a lot of, in West Sacramento, for example, where there's an existing microtransit programs, a lot of people using it to go to the grocery store or to get bigger items that they wouldn't have done previously, as surveys have found. So we're seeing a lot of these. This was the original forming of the Los Angeles Metro's microtransit, was supposed to be around transit centers to get people to and from the transit centers, especially in areas that were underserved by existing transit. Similarly, DC started a microtransit program around transit centers to get people to metro stations. This is probably one of the first use cases, and this is adapting. In fact, both of those examples that I mentioned have adapted post-COVID, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. Another use case that's been tested quite a bit is overnight or late night service. A lot of transit locations, even places that are well served by transit, often don't have late shift transit options, or at least not in the same numbers. So because the numbers of people utilizing these services at that time are a little lower, they are currently, most of these partnerships are with TNCs. So for example, a transit agency will partner with Lyft or Uber to provide low cost or free options for late night workers. This works really well in metro areas or regions that have high numbers of late shift workers. For example, Pinellas County, Florida was one of the first to try microtransit late at night. They partnered with Lyft to do so. There's a Metropolitan Council in Minneapolis is also currently revitalizing their shuttle buses to serve late night and late shift workers. In fact, they did a study where they found that 17% of workers in metropolitan regions in the United States are actually late shift workers working between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., 4 p.m. and 6 a.m. And a disproportionate number of those are low income or minority workers. So this also becomes quite a big equity issue and a way to combat some of that inequitable access that was mentioned earlier. The program in Minneapolis is actually employer funded as well. So if you have large employment centers, they can help contribute to some services such as this, because they find that it tends to be beneficial. It actually tends to lower the number of people that miss shifts or are late to shifts because they have certainty in transportation options. The program I mentioned earlier in DC has actually shifted with COVID to offer late night service specifically for hospital workers. So that's also an option that's being examined by places. And then finally, another of the traditional use cases, which is similar to what's happening in Wilson, is either enhanced or replaced service in specific areas. So this is often combined with first and last mile service. So a lot of agencies, this is a map of the Utah Transit Authority's microtransit region. It's 65 square miles. And the idea is to connect people to these major transit centers, the Draper Frontrunner Station, the South Jordan Frontrunner Station, et cetera. However, folks can also just take rides within this zone. So if they live somewhere where there's less options for transit or infrequent seat services or inefficient connections, for example, if you have to, change trains 5 times to go 2 miles, then the option of an efficient, on-demand, and affordable service that will just get you point to point becomes very appealing. So this type of service has increasing potential for not just metro areas, but also for suburban and rural areas where there's less frequent service and traditional transit doesn't make as much sense. There's also potential for cost savings here in replacing inefficient transit services. Ryco, one of the providers, did a study with Via Metro Transit in San Antonio, Texas, back in May. And they actually replaced underperforming bus routes in the region, as well as added additional services to get people to and from transit hubs. And they found, analyzing their data, that they reduced the wait time for users from approximately 1 hour between buses, waiting for buses, to about 12 minutes. And they also connected 40% more of the passengers to existing fixed transit services. So as you can see, there's a lot of potential in this model. Most of these are being tested, so they're sort of 1 year, 2 year pilots that will then be iterated as they move forward, potentially expanded. One of the things we're seeing now is that the flexibility and quickness of microtransit services has become a real asset during COVID, as well as the technology because of the needs for social distancing and safety concerns. So a lot of use cases we're seeing right now are connecting people using microtransit services to connect people to essential services. And that can be, as mentioned in the case of DC, for example, by shifting an existing microtransit program they have to provide options for people with essential services or essential workers. Or it can be things like providing food delivery and supply delivery for different regions. The picture we have here is the Columbus Transit Agency's microtransit program. They actually had started this project prior to COVID, but when COVID hit, they were able to stand up a microtransit program within 2 weeks and fill in some gaps from service reductions that they were having. The other benefit of microtransit services for COVID in particular is that they can automate the social distancing and safety needs. So you automatically know how many people are on a bus, how much space there is on a bus, and whether they need to call a different service or reroute in order to ensure that there is that social distancing for safety concerns. Some other potential opportunities that are not as big in terms of being explored yet, but could be in the future, include things like right-sizing vehicles. This is obviously connected to some of the other use cases in terms of determining whether fixed-route transit is efficient in a region or not. But there's the opportunity to create smaller vehicles for smaller trips or less density areas, to create vehicles that have better ADA access and pair with paratransit services, for example. And again, to use that technology to enhance safety as people start to return to transit in bigger ways. But some things to consider when considering different microtransit services, in addition to the use cases and which versions will be utilized or tested, there are needs and concerns around labor and unions. Now, these have been very in the past 6 months or so, there's been a lot of interesting developments, interesting ways to work with labor unions. Some of the companies are actually training existing bus drivers to be drivers on microtransit services. So whereas I believe about two or 3 years ago, this would have shut down a conversation, I think the companies have really stepped up and agencies have stepped up and found ways to make this work for everyone. But it is something that needs to be discussed and figured out. Engaging the potential users is really important to think about what works and what doesn't, especially because microtransit services tend to offer a flexibility in terms of how they're iterated. So if you find that something isn't working for the customer base or a particular format is missing, for example, if you just have an app and you find a lot of elderly people need to use the service and aren't comfortable using an app or don't have access to an app, there's easier ways to implement other options such as call centers or what have you. So really getting that user engagement is key so that the program can be optimized to the use case that it's serving. And planning for scalability is incredibly important, especially as ridership numbers on traditional transit have decreased so much during COVID. With the uncertainty of how they will return and when and how people will return to transit, it's important to have plans for scaling, whether it's microtransit into more microtransit or microtransit into traditional fixed transit routes, figuring out what to do if the system becomes incredibly popular and has high ridership, which is a great problem to have, but then what comes next? How is it funded? How is it scaled out? And there's some important lessons to be learned, I think, from places around the country on that, but it's important to consider as you move into a project. The financial feasibility, which I just realized I have a typo on, I apologize for the spelling error, but really thinking about who the partners are and what their financial plan is. So we saw a lot of pilots early on in the sort of innovation space being funded by one-time grants or one-time funding. And that's great to do a pilot, but if the pilot is successful, it wants to be scaled and implemented on a more permanent basis. So really working out what that could look like in the future and in future iterations, and having more secure sources of funding. Whereas I would say, though, that grants are a really, really good way to get this moving in the first place, especially coming out of the federal government. There seems to be a lot more money going towards some of these innovative ideas, which is exciting. And then finally, procurement and contracting, just something to think about as a partner is chosen, as a plan is made, is sort of what local agencies and public agencies are locking themselves into and what kind of mechanisms are there for iteration as the project moves forward and potentially may need to shift or expand. So just some considerations. And that is it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Sahar. We do have time for one or two questions, and then we'll need to move on to the next presentation, but there'll also be time at the end of the session. Okay, we'll go ahead and shift over to the other slides. That'll take us, a little bit here to move over to the other slide deck. If you have any questions, ask Grona, Roger, Rachel, and okay,
great.
Good to go.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. We are so excited to join you all for today's webinar. I'm joined today. My name is Olivia Bleha. I work at VIA on our partnerships team. I lead the development of new partnerships with cities and transit agencies, counties, universities throughout the East Coast, with a particular focus on the Southeast. So I've been working very closely with the entire Wilson team, with the folks from the NCDOT, and am very excited to get the chance to share a little bit more about the work that we've been doing with Wilson and the really exciting service that has recently been launched. I'm joined, we can do introductions really quickly. Maybe Roger, do you want to introduce yourself, then Grona, then Rachel?
Sure. So I'm Roger Lentz. I'm the Chief Planning and Development Officer here with the City of Wilson and been here about 14 years.
Great. Grona?
Oh, Grona's on mute, I think.
I'm Grona Jones. I'm Transportation Manager with the City of Wilson, and I have been here 31 years.
Great.
Hello, I'm Rachel Birnbaum. I'm also at VIA. I am, of course, someone who works for a technology company and cannot get my camera to work, so I apologize. But I am on the expansion team at VIA, so I work with cities and transit agencies like Wilson and NCDOT to help launch new services.
Great, thanks. So I will let Roger kick us off here, but our plan for today is to talk a little bit about Wilson's vision and how they even conceived of the notion of a transition to a dynamic transit network. Roger will take us through that. Then we'll talk a little bit about what the partnership between VIA and a transit agency tends to look like. And we'll spend most of that time sharing other examples of how other agencies are using transit technology in innovative ways. Grona and Rachel will go through some of the sort of, we call them what about questions, big FAQs that agencies often have as they're thinking about microtransit. And then we'll show some numbers, sort of how the service is progressing, even just 6 to 8 weeks into the service. And then we'll give some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, Roger, why don't I turn it over to you?
Great, thank you, Olivia. So I think, as I've been told, Wilson has been known for having, we're the smallest city with that had a fixed route system, and you can see that map here, 6 routes. And of course, as the city has grown, as Julie said, employment centers changed. This downtown was the center of employment until sort of the tobacco markets left. Wilson's a big tobacco town. We've been more industrial based, and those jobs have been moving out toward the edge of the city. And so our system has not grown out with the city like it should. And really, some of that's a funding issue. We're running hour headways, as you can see here, with the fixed routes. And while there had been route studies trying to figure out how to expand the service, those just did not come to play, either through lack of funding or whatnot. And really, without additional funding, you weren't going to tackle this 60-minute headway. And Sahar had suggested another system that people were having to wait about an hour for the bus. And that was the kind of things we were seeing in Wilson, depending on the type of trip you're going to make. So 40% of the city, is maybe a little generous. Not all of those the yellow route that you see there doesn't run, on the hour. That was a limited route. So, but we'll call it 40%. And I'm actually really pleased to hear what Julie's saying about this mobility being brought together, because one of the other issues for us was lack of sidewalks. So while we're aggressively building sidewalks now, these routes that you see are not on places accessible by sidewalks and bike lanes and whatnot. And that's going to take us a long time to fix, and we are working on it. But that's why you see some of these routes taking such a circuitous route on this map, is because Grona was trying to provide the best service to her customers that were often older, they could be disabled, and telling them to walk down a street to the main road is a problem. So that's certainly impacted our ability to provide excellent service on our fixed route. So we started talking about several years ago, Grant Goings, our city manager, and I started talking about different ways we might tackle this transit issue. So I think we can go to the next slide. And we started talking about the things that were important to us. And one of the things that we have a great collaborative with business, industry, institutional users, government, in this group called Wilson Forward. And what we found out in that group is that I think some in the community made an assumption that we had high unemployment because people couldn't pass background checks or maybe drug tests or whatever might be there as a potential excuse. Well, that was not the case. When we surveyed business, what we found out is the number one reason people were having a hard time with work is transportation. Unreliable transportation. We have a high percentage of folks that did not have access to car. And if our bus system's not taking you out to the corporate park, for example, then those were jobs not available to you, even though those were very high paying jobs and didn't necessarily require a college education to get. So driving economic growth and connection to jobs was critically important. And just improving access to the entire city. There's all kinds of areas that could not be accessed by transit, or were being accessed by very expensive transit, where we had a partnership with the county transit system to provide folks rides if they were outside of our service area. Those trips were very, very expensive to us. So, could we cover that and provide better access? Our system had a reputation around town as, we'll call it a needs-based system, so that only people that did not have a car really needed to ride or use the system. And we wanted to change that because, that's not what transit should be. And, fair or not, that's what people were talking about in the community. So could we provide a different experience while still being very concerned about those needs-based riders? I mean, obviously we had to provide service. Whatever we designed had to serve that population. but could we do so in a way that would then also open it up to maybe a new population of users that had not considered our transit system before. Of course, we wanted to deliver a high quality of service, so it needed to be quick. We needed to be able to beat the bus as far as time, that, you know, not having to wait an hour between when the bus might come by your house. And we also wanted the ability to experiment, try new things, pilot different ideas. And so those were all important to us as we were thinking about, you know, what might be out there. So yeah, we can go to the next thing. And the next, I'll talk to you a little bit more about the history in a little bit, but where we've landed is in this service that you see here. A few have described to you. That is an on-demand service that is accessible by not only the smartphone. A lot of people carry those today. I know I couldn't get by without it. But we know that not everybody has that, right? So not everybody has a debit card. Not everybody has the ability to use and access things like I do. So we needed to also provide ways for people to access this service through other traditional ways, like a phone or you know, a voucher type system if they did not have debit cards. So we had all these different things that we had as necessities really for us to make sure that we were providing accessible service to those that were our current riders, but do so in a first-class way. So you see the vehicles up top. I love the vehicle, a Chrysler Pacifica, leather seats. It's a first-class ride. It's something that, you know, if it was an Uber, it'd probably be like the higher level Uber type of vehicle that you get on your phone. And people have been very pleased with that. It's all on demand. And they use a virtual bus stop, so you do have to walk maybe a block or two, which helps our system be more efficient. And then we wanted to develop a distinct brand so that people knew it was something new, but yet it was distinctly Wilson. So Ride, you see, kind of uses the same colors as the city's logo. The leaf is one of the pieces of our logo. So we pulled in the things that are uniquely Wilson, but rebranded the service so people knew it was something completely new and to give it a try. So the fares are very reasonable, as you can see. $1.50. I think our base bus fare before this was $1.25. And there are discounts available. And we also kept people that were already riding for free or riding half price, that continued so that people would not lose those discounts. And you know, the same thing if myself and let's say my wife or partner wanted to or friend wanted to get a ride, then we give a discount there as well to try to entice people to ride together, you know, when that makes sense for them. So that's what this, and we'll get a little bit more into the service later in the show, but that gives you a little flavor for where Wilson went. And I think we can go to the next slide. And so how did we get here? So I'll just give you a brief overview of kind of the thinking that we went through before we landed with VIA. And so I mentioned to you that we talked about this for several years, trying to figure out what might be a better way to provide transit service in Wilson. So I love to read, I love to research, and was trying to find different models out there, and just could not find anything even, you know, 4 and 5 years ago when we were looking at this. Then we started hearing about some transit partnerships. Well, before that, actually, I saw VIA. VIA was actually a company, I think a smaller company at the time, but they were providing service. I think it was DC, maybe New York, Chicago, where they were running you know, it's the company. It was like fixed route Uber is the way I would describe it. It was like they had these routes and you could get on it, and it ran a certain street in these cities, and so it was sort of this on-demand but maybe more fixed route type transit. And I remember researching them at the time, and they weren't really going into the model that we were looking for yet. And that was the same experience we had with kind of Uber and Lyft. We saw these first mile, last mile partnerships. I remember Triangle Transit a couple of years ago, I made a phone call, and they had an article in the News and Observer. And so they actually gave me a phone number because I had been trying to call these. You can't call Uber. You can't find their phone number, or Lyft, you know, so it was very hard to get in touch with somebody. But I got a number to someone on the inside and just never got any calls back. So that told me that, you know, we were just too small for them to have an interest in working in any kind of partnership with us. And then we found a software provider, not VIA, but another company out there that would provide the tech but did not provide the third-party operation. And so we actually went down that rabbit hole for about a year with them, thinking about, what would that look like with the city? What would it take for us to stand something up like this? Maybe we should try it on one route just to see how it would work. And when we started penciling it out and the amount of risk that would entail was not something that the city was ready for, because you would, literally the number of vehicles we'd have to buy, the number of new drivers we would have to hire, and the risk of money that we were putting out on that if it did not work was too great. So we started doing a little bit more research, and that's where we got connected with VIA and through Olivia and her team, which was they were offering this third-party services, which then I did a little more research and found some work they had done in Arlington, Texas, for example. That was the city that kind of caught our attention, and what they did there. They had, I think they're known as maybe the largest metro in America that did not have transit. I think they had maybe one bus route. And so we actually did a little research on them. We're pleased with what they were finding there. And so we started going down this path. And so I think with that, I think, Olivia, you could tell a little bit more about the sort of services and that VIA offers.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Roger. All right, so I will keep this quick so we can focus more on Wilson. But broadly speaking, VIA is a public mobility company. As Roger mentioned, back in 2012, VIA was started as a TNC. We were operating in New York City, in Washington, D.C. We were directly competitive with Uber and Lyft in those markets. But our key differentiator was that our focus was on shared rides. So from day one, our technology has been really laser focused on aggregating riders together who are going in the same direction and assigning them to a shared vehicle. The goal with that, of course, is that by encouraging riders to share trips, we can create more efficient transit systems and move people around our communities more effectively. So as Roger mentioned, when we started, we were just directly operating those services ourselves. But VIA as a company over the past 8 years has really shifted its focus to where now our focus as a company is on establishing partnerships like the one we have with Wilson, where we provide technology or operations services to transit agencies, cities, campuses, other sort of county governments to help them improve their own transit. So fast forward to 2020, and now we have sort of solutions that can cover almost every aspect of public mobility that you could think of. So of course, we're still helping agencies with sort of typical on-demand public transit, but we're also increasingly working with fixed route, helping agencies thinking about things like efficient scheduling, capacity management on fixed route. We operate and provide technology for paratransit and NEMT services, helping those to become a little bit more efficient, a little bit more rider friendly. We're providing routing software for school buses. We provide campus and corporate shuttles, and sort of beyond those elements of mobility, we're really helping agencies to move beyond, I think, this mindset that can exist where you say, hey, we're going to do an experiment with microtransit and we're going to see if microtransit can work. I think our belief now is that we know microtransit works. A lot of agencies and a lot of towns have done very successful microtransit pilots. And now it's more about thinking about, okay, how do you incorporate microtransit into your network in a way that increases the efficiency of the entire network? So how is microtransit just one tool in a transit network that also includes fixed route, paratransit, and how do we ensure that riders can use and access all of those modes seamlessly, and also that as administrators, that you're able to sort of shuffle resources and make decisions holistically across all of those modes at once. So that's where some of the things you see on the bottom here: integrated mobility, transit planning services, sort of advanced tech and demand management. All of those things are just parts of how we're trying to help agencies think a bit more holistically about where technology can fit into their transit networks. At this point, VIA is working throughout the globe with communities who are interested in implementing dynamic transit. This slide is actually outdated. We're probably closer to 200 partnerships at this point. The city names here are pretty tiny, but I show this map just to emphasize the sheer breadth where our technology has been deployed. So we're working with cities kind of as metropolitan and dense as New York and Tokyo and London. But as Roger has mentioned, our technology is also powering transit for a city of Wilson size. We're also working in areas that are quite rural and spread out, like Baldwin County, Alabama. So we are certainly excited about the challenges that come with adapting our technology to reflect the very specific needs of each community. This is just a little bit more detail on who we work with. We're seeing lots of innovation come from across the world, across sectors, municipalities, agencies, sort of private public transportation operators, as well as corporations and universities. All of them are actually thinking in really interesting and innovative ways about where technology can help them achieve their goals. Very briefly, how the core of VIA's technology is this concept of smart rides with virtual stops. We think that what our technology does the best is that when riders make a phone call to request a ride or use our app to book a ride, they input their origin and their destination data, and what happens then, the algorithm looks around at all of the different riders in the system, all of the different vehicles in the system, and it pairs riders together who are traveling along the same path. Then those riders are assigned to the best vehicle for that shared journey. And what I mean by the best vehicle is that it's a vehicle that has the right number of seats for that rider and their companion. And also it's a vehicle that can meet their mobility needs. So if I'm a rider who uses a wheelchair, I will automatically be matched with vehicles that can accommodate my wheelchair. So once that assignment has been made, both riders and drivers are then dynamically routed to the best virtual spot for them to meet each other. So as Roger mentioned, there's no fixed routes, there's no fixed bus stops. All of the sort of routing and stops are being created dynamically in response to real-time demand in real-time conditions like traffic, road closures, big events, etc. So all of these things together create a very sort of convenient and easy experience for the riders and a very efficient network overall. There's two ways that we can work with agencies and partners. Sort of Sahar mentioned, why agencies might think about software versus sort of turnkey model. In this case, VIA does both. Sometimes we are working with agencies and cities and we are providing software as a service. That is, our partners can license our technology to help them power their own on-demand transit service. In that case, our partners use their vehicles, their drivers, their admin to drive the service, but it's VIA's technology. In other cases, we provide transportation as a service, which is what we're doing in Wilson. That is a turnkey solution where VIA is actually operating the service on behalf of our partner. So in that case, VIA is providing not only the technology, but we're also recruiting drivers, procuring vehicles, and doing all of the sort of day-to-day operations management. Last thing I'll mention here before I share a couple of interesting examples is all about sort of data. I know as transit agencies, as planners, as cities, all of you on the phone need access to data regarding the services that you're providing to your riders. We understand that's important for regulatory reasons, for planning reasons, for budgetary reasons. And so it's our belief that if you work with VIA, it is your data. And so we make it quite easy for your team to sort of access and digest data about your services and make it really easy for you to understand sort of what's going well and what can be improved upon. I'll wrap up with a couple of quick examples of some interesting ways that other cities and agencies are using technology. Sahar mentioned some really excellent ones at the beginning, so hopefully these examples just serve to further kind of broaden the scope of what transit technology can do. This is an example from a city partner of ours up in Ontario, Canada. It's a city called Sault Ste. Marie. Their problem was that they operate a fixed route bus network. What they found is that on Sunday afternoons and evenings, ridership was very low. And in fact, it was low to the point where it no longer made sense for them to operate their fixed routes at that time. But of course, providing coverage somehow was important. So what they did in this case was they installed VIA's technology onto their full-size buses. And while the buses continue to operate on fixed routes throughout the week, what they do is on Sunday afternoons and evenings, the buses entirely convert to an on-demand model. So there's no more fixed routes, no more bus stops on Sunday evenings. Riders just can call the bus on demand. What that allowed them to do was actually to take an entire full-size bus off the road during those hours. They were able to decrease their average wait time from about 60 minutes down to 12 minutes. They actually expanded the coverage area that they were serving with the fixed route. And as you can see, the utilization is relatively high for those hours. So, they were able to serve more riders, a bigger coverage area more quickly with less buses. So this is just a very interesting example of this city identifying exactly where microtransit could work for them in a very specific way. Another example that's probably interesting to you all is what King County Metro and the city of Seattle have done out in Seattle, Washington. They had a persistent problem where in several light rail stations in the parking lots, they actually parking was very limited, and it would close by about 6 or 7 in the morning. So folks effectively couldn't drive to these light rail stations. What they did is they created a first last mile service where riders could go to or from the light rail stations, but they actually cannot go anywhere else. And so this is very specifically scoped out to provide first last miles. They have great utilizations, 14 passengers per vehicle hour. And they've incorporated this service into their regional transit card. So it's a very seamless trip for riders. They can just pay with one card for the VIA and the light rail. Last thing I'll mention here is that even beyond kind of traditional microtransit, we're also seeing agencies who are using technology and creative service models to improve performance and rider experience for their paratransit. So these are 2 examples of VIA operated services. We operate our service on behalf of Hampton Roads Transit. It's a very large zone with 350 square miles. We provide them sort of both the technology as well as the operations dispatch call center for the service. They've been able to really increase their on-time performance, decrease trip duration, increase productivity, thanks to kind of very efficient routing and efficient sort of automated dispatching and scheduling. Very interesting option from Green Bay Metro. They also, we operate their sort of traditional 88 paratransit service. What they have done is they actually saw an opportunity to use the same fleet and the same technology to actually offer a kind of general population microtransit service on top of the paratransit service. And what that allowed them to do is to increase the coverage of their fixed route network by offering microtransit. And they could improve the fare box recovery on these vehicles because you could fill in kind of extra seats with Gen Pop riders who are requesting on-demand trips. So it was just overall a nice way for them to create this hybrid paratransit microtransit system that allowed for the whole system to operate overall and gave Gen Pop riders just another way to move around the metro area. I'll skip this example because we're running short on time, and I will turn it over to Rachel and Grona, who can go through some of our sort of FAQs or sticking points as we were launching the service.
Thank you, Olivia. Hello, everybody. I'm gonna use my few minutes to kind of give my thoughts. I know you wanted Grona. Were you on board with this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You know, after you've been at the same system for so many years, you feel that you know your passengers. You've got a feel for the transit dependent population in general. So my original thoughts was the city of Wilson has lost their mind. They're gonna throw my passengers away. And as Roger said, they're going to go after those that have been non-transit dependent after all these years. But I knew if the project was going to be successful, then I had to get on board and kind of rearrange my thinking process. And then I also had in my mind compliance issues. How are we going to deal with compliance issues and those kind of things? So Rachel, that you're here next, working with Via, she and I had kind of the same feelings, and we just kind of started working together and came up with some of the following suggestions and options, and everything's worked out fine. Rach?
Yeah, thank you, Grona. So yeah, I think as Grona said, like, I think that her skepticism was incredibly helpful because it meant that she asked all of these really important questions that then we worked together and worked through together to solve. So one of the first questions that she really asked was, well, how do we make sure that this service is accessible? Like, these are minivans zipping around. What are we going to do here? And so there's sort of three ways that we worked through that. The first is that Via's core technology, our core app does have accessibility features for hearing and visually impaired riders. I think the other point there is that, you know, this app has been refined from some years of feedback from general population trips, as well as Olivia mentioned, some of our paratransit deployments. So beyond the sort of core functionality, it's also quite customizable. So I'll speak very briefly about wheelchair accessible rides and about riders with limited mobility as kind of two groups here. For riders that require a wheelchair, we actually have in their account just like a quick little toggle. They can turn it on if they need a wheelchair ride. If they only sometimes need a wheelchair ride, they can turn it off when they don't need it. And that means, as Olivia said, that anytime a rider has a wheelchair need, a vehicle will only be assigned to them if it can actually take them in the vehicle. And the driver partners who drive those vehicles are PASS certified, which means not only are they, you know, trained in all of the securement and safety, but they also have the sensitivity training to ensure that, you know, they're treating the wheelchair as an extension of the rider. They're not touching it without permission, all of the things that you want to make sure that a wheelchair rider is comfortable. For riders with limited mobility, so someone who might not be in a wheelchair, but you know, they don't want to be dropped off at a nearby corner, that's confusing for them or that's difficult for walking, we have the ability to kind of add a little note to their account that their rides are all door to door. And so they get picked up right where they are, they get dropped off right where they need to go. And we've also worked with the Grona and the City of Wilson to add some additional mobility accessories to make sure that riders have an easy time stepping up into the vans.
Smartphones and bank accounts. That was another big problem for me, or a big issue for me, because I found, or I knew that the majority of our passengers, your elderly, a lot of your disabled, they didn't have smartphones with readily available data throughout the whole month. They had bank accounts, but they don't use their bank accounts to access throughout the month. Their money's deposited, they take their money out, they pay their bills with their with money orders and that kind of thing. They just didn't know anything about apps and that kind of thing. So again, Rachel and I worked hard on it. We worked long, late hours at night. And so Rachel's going to talk about some of the solutions that we came up with for this particular segment of the population.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing that Grona and I kind of worked together on was just the understanding that, you know, these rider groups are not monolithic. So someone's sort of barriers or motivations for not having a smartphone or not wanting to use their debit card might be different. And so what was important to us as a group with the City of Wilson was to make sure we just have a couple options for these different rider groups. So in terms of someone who doesn't have a smartphone or maybe isn't so comfortable with their smartphone, we do have 3 different ways they can book. One is they can book through the app. The other is they can book by a good old fashioned call, and they can also book on the, as Roger mentioned, the mobile like web version, which can be accessed on a desktop computer as well. I think that in terms of riders who are cash preferred, right? So they're used to paying in cash, or they don't want to add a debit card, or they don't have one. On one level, we're able to work with them to make sure that they can use prepaid debit cards if they'd like. So we're able to configure our system to allow using those cards as a payment method. And then the fun one is that we worked with the city of Wilson on the idea of being able to pay for rides in cash in advance and buy these cute little ride credit cards, basically. And so what was amazing is that the city of Wilson set up with their customer service center and some other points around the city, the ability for a rider to just walk right up to the window, hand over $5, and get this awesome little card. On this card, you'll see there's printed a cute customizable code. And that code they can either enter into the app, or they can call and we'll add it for them, and it will grant them ride credit. And we actually give them a little bit of a leg up, a little bonus there. So if they buy $5 worth of rides, we give them 6.
No rider left behind. That was my goal from day one of the project. So as you know, our passengers at that time, they knew how to access our fixed route system. They knew the schedules, they knew the days, they knew how to call us and get passenger information. So they weren't going to have a clue as to how they were going to use ride, what was ride, were they going to be able to ride it. So we worked really hard with VIA and came up with a couple of really good options.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think also, especially in the situation where, as Verna said, someone was used to taking the bus yesterday and today there is no bus, like it's a great responsibility to ensure that they understand how this new service is going to work. And we sort of thought about it as making sure that we could hit riders in every touch point, which is especially hard, of course, given COVID, because in sort of a situation where there's not a global pandemic, I would be able to go to Wilson, I would get to walk around everywhere and hand out flyers and chat with everyone and have a whole team with me. But that's just wasn't really a safe approach to take. And so we had to get a little creative there. So we worked with the city of Wilson to identify, where do we think riders are currently traveling, where do they work, where do they pray, where do they gather, where do they shop, and sort of came up with all of these different places we thought we could get in touch with them. And so as you can see, some of those were physical touch points, right? So we installed signage at the current bus stops. Our ride vehicles are nice little driving billboards. And some of them were a little bit more sort of digital and community oriented. So we worked with the Department of Social Services and Wilson Wellness Collaborative and the Wilson Housing Authority and a variety of other wonderful organizations to help enlist them to sort of spread the word to their audience. And then beyond that, we worked with the city of Wilson on sort of the idea of pre-registering for the service. So we had this form up on the Wilson website where if anyone was nervous about transitioning to the new service or they didn't have a smartphone, they could enter their information on this little form, and we would pre-create an account for them in the ride system. And then they could let us know what their preferred method of communication was, and we would communicate with them that way. So that was mostly giving about 73 distinct Wilsonians a personal call to talk them through the service and just ensure that all of their questions were answered and that we could really work with them one-on-one to make sure that it was working the best it could for them. And then anyone that we weren't able to get in touch with, of course, Grona was an amazing ambassador, able to chat with them one-on-one as well, as she continues to do.
Can this service be FTA compliant? Absolutely. Here we are. I know. If you know Ryan and Heather, you know that there's no way we would be up here today if we hadn't gotten FTA compliant. When specific 5311 topics came up, Ryan was right there. The VIA team was right there. I guess you can realize drug and alcohol had to be addressed, accident reporting, all kind of training. I can suggest if you're thinking about doing this, work with your IMDs, MDSs to make sure that your RFP or your RFS are correct. Make sure that the contract parts of it have been covered. All I can tell you is that if we could do it during a pandemic, I actually have never met in person any of the VIA team. We've always met through Zoom calls or telephone calls. But you can do it. Rachel's a big help. Rachel had worked with other systems on compliance issues. Unfortunately, they weren't that familiar with North Carolina because we are the first. But I'm sure Rachel can explain a little bit of the problems that she experienced working with me on compliance. That was my biggest area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I've worked with a lot of different organizations that, receive federal and or state funding. So VIA, thankfully, I had a lot of VIA knowledge to draw on to work on a service like this. And we do provide a lot of specialized reporting and other elements that can make compliance hopefully a little bit easier, not too painful. And I have to say, although it's a bit embarrassing, compliance has never been fun for me. And working with Grona and Ryan and the NCDO team on this, I actually truly looked forward to these conversations. It was a very collaborative group, and we got a lot of things figured out and buttoned up extremely quickly and very creatively, using a lot of the tools we already had ready in the VIA toolbox and a lot of the really wonderful local knowledge that NCDOT and Grona and team had. So yeah, this is my saying compliance was fun for this. It's true.
On the record.
Do I think, or do we think our model is sustainable? Absolutely. Absolutely. People are asking a lot of questions, is it sustainable after or with your pre-COVID numbers? Absolutely. Absolutely. If you look at the numbers, we're extremely successful. So yes, I think we are here to stay. Rachel?
Absolutely. I think one thing that was really cool is this service was it was spec'd out, before COVID with the thought that we would have that ridership or above. And so one of the coolest things about microtransit, obviously, is that you can add additional rides more quickly than you need to add additional vehicles and get increased efficiency from there.
And one of the things that I can add is prior to the launch of VIA, in April, our service went to a fixed route demand response service. So I stopped running fixed routes altogether and had gone to demand response where the passengers had to call in. So that was a tremendous help that they had gotten accustomed to calling in and requesting their service. They still had to go to bus stops and they still had the same service hours, but at least it wasn't a drastic overnight change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Okay, great. Roger, do you want to take us through some early numbers? We'll note that the service only launched on September 1st, so that gives us about almost 2 months of data that you'll see. Go ahead, Roger.
Sure. So, yeah, here we are. You can see month over month, or I'm sorry, week over week, how we've done. The first week we had no idea what was going to happen, and it's like, will we get one rider? Will we get 50 riders? I think I asked the VIA staff, what do you think? And they thought maybe 100 or 200 riders, and we got over 500, and we were all pretty excited, like maybe we're onto something. And certainly, there was some confusion that first week, as would be expected. But here's the part, when I talked about risk. So VIA has a call center, and the call center was getting somewhat overwhelmed with the calls, even though we were trying to preach, call early, set your accounts up. People, are procrastinators. I'll raise my hand. I'm a procrastinator. And they quickly were able to stand up, additional capacity in that call center to deal with those issues. And so, we smoothly went through. And here's the interesting thing, and you can see where the ridership numbers have gone. Pay attention to this one. I'm using my mouse, and you can't see it. That's only on my screen. September the 28th. So on the September 28th week, that's when free rides ended. So we had 10 free ride promotion during the first month. And after that week, it was kind of like, okay, what's going to happen? So on October 1st, what's going to happen to our ridership? Is it going to plummet because people were just excited that it was free and now they don't want to pay for it? And you can see, I think I think, we had just a slight drop, maybe 50 rides at most. And, the next week after that, it started to come back. So just a tiny drop in ridership after the free rides turned off. But if we go to the next slide, you can see the number of rides we've provided, 8,600 rides. We have 538 unique riders. I think there's something like maybe 700 that have registered. So there's some people maybe registered and haven't taken a ride yet. And I was really happy with the app booking. So a lot of people are in fact using the app, and sometimes you can actually see in the data where they book by app or phone. And some people, well, they have an app, because you can see they booked with the app, but yet sometimes they use the phone anyway. So, obviously we want to help those folks continue to use the app. But I'm very pleased with this. It's actually much higher than I thought would be the case. And here's the bottom number is what brings it home for me. So 4.8 stars out of 5. People have a chance to rate. You get, after your ride, you get a prompt to rate your ride. People, of course, have a phone number they can call in complaints or whatnot. But very highly rated. We are providing what we promised, which was, rides within 15 minutes. So 10.5 minutes is the average. And what's really cool, I'll just tell you a couple personal stories. I know we need to leave time for Q&A, but I've of course ride the service. It was like Christmas the day I got to ride for the first time. And I've had several occasions where I've ridden with folks that were maybe previous bus fixed route riders. In fact, one of our driver partners was a former rider of our transit system maybe 10 years ago. And so I've had an opportunity to ask people, tell me your story. What do you think of the service? And, what you hear are, man, with the fixed route, I absolutely needed it, but now I can, if I need a gallon of milk, I can go get a gallon of milk. I don't have to wait, and make big plans for that. I rode with 2 gentlemen that were going to work. They worked at Buffalo Wild Wings, in fact, and they had, I don't know if they're roommates or whatever, but they had combined their trips to save a little bit of money. And of course, they weren't going to get off till midnight, but they would have a way to get home. But talking about the ways that was really important to them to be able to get to their job. That now they didn't have to beg for rides anymore, because with the bus system, what they told me is when their shift started, they would have had to get to work maybe 45 minutes early before their shift, which is 45 minutes that maybe they could have used doing other things. And so they said this really enabled them to have more of their day, more of their time, and it felt like having a car. So it was really just a couple small stories, but there's been many stories like that. I think they told me that one person was calling into the call center in tears because they were so happy with the service. But it all goes back to freedom and access, right? So one of our big things was equity, making sure that people could get to where they wanted to go quickly, wherever they wanted to go, and make sure it was a first-class experience. And I think based on the ratings and based on the feedback we've gotten so far, I think we've hit a home run in that regard. Do we have another slide?
One more.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is great. So with the AIM grant, and Ryan and Sahar, Julie, great partners on this, where we were able to get the AIM grant that we're working through the sort of paperwork and compliance issues now, and hopefully we'll be able to start spending some money soon. But $250,000 was awarded to the system. And what we want to do with that is we want to try some service that we've not been able to try before. So I just used the example of the workers. I don't think I'm going to get to midnight. It's probably not enough money for that. But being able to provide later hours or maybe a little bit earlier in the morning. We've heard from one employer wondering if we could start a little early because of the shift times that they have. But being able to pilot that to see how it works, to see the sustainability of it, and then trying to seek either money through state, FTA, or local government, or even partners. I know Via mentioned the partnerships they have with the large employers. Would some of the large employers be willing to work with us to help either subsidize or fund some of these trips to help us at those late nights? So I think we're going to get to try it. We're going to get to see how that works. We get to experiment a little bit, and then see what sticks, which is really exciting to me. And that's what's really to me at the end of the day the benefit of the microtransit service as we've designed it here is the ability, and I mentioned risk early on. So, you know, if we had to buy 10 vehicles and get, you know, 20 drivers and all of that and stand up some kind of call center, the amount of money that would have taken up front to stand this service up would have just been too great, and we probably wouldn't have gotten there. So having a third party do that, and we have a, you know, it's a 1-year contract. It's working wonderfully. So I expect there'll be many more years of partnership. But you know, if we had to turn it off, then we had the ability to turn it off, and then we go back to what we were doing before, right? Or maybe something a little bit different. But that was a lot of risk. That would have been a lot of money to put out for something that may or may not work. And so this really allowed us to try something new and get our council very comfortable with it. I think it would have been a hard sell to say, hey, I need $1 million for vehicles, and oh, by the way, I need you know, we're going to hire this many drivers and whatnot. That would have been a really hard lift for us. So very good. Do we have another slide? I think this might have been it.
I think we just had time for questions.
Yeah, right.
Yep. And we have quite a few questions. So, and I know we only have 10 minutes left, but I'm going to try to get through as many of these as we can.
Okay.
So just keep that in mind when you're answering. We'll just try to, and any that we don't cover, we can follow up separately with these individuals. We'll have a list of the questions and we can reach out to you separately. So let's see. Wait. What did the city of Wilson do to ensure they meet FTA's ADA compliance while operating an all-day microtransit service? I think we touched on that a little bit, but do you want to just reinforce how we're meeting ADA?
Sure. Yeah. The key elements there are of course, the inclusion of wheelchair accessible vehicles in the fleet, the sort of equal quality of service for folks who require a wheelchair accessible vehicle versus those who do not, and the ability for folks to receive sort of like a pickup directly at their curb versus having to walk to a virtual bus stop. All of those things ensure that you know, we are providing a trip that's accessible to folks with disabilities.
Yeah, and the key is equal access, basically, right? And ensuring equivalent access. I see that the pickups are done at a centralized bus stop, the virtual bus stops. Are drop-offs done the same way, or are passengers dropped off exactly where they requested to go?
Yeah, so both pickups and drop-offs can happen at the concept of a virtual bus stop, which, to be clear, is literally any point in the city of Wilson where it is safe and sort of reasonable to be picked up or dropped off at. Often we like it to be at a street corner or a place of business, something like that, where riders can get their pickup or drop off. Of course, again, if you're somebody who has a mobility issue, you could get picked up right at the very address that you requested the pickup at.
Are the miles traveled by the on-demand vehicles reported to NTD as revenue miles?
A great question. Grona and Roger, maybe you guys can chime in on this, but I believe the answer is yes.
On my first quarter offset reports, I did report them as revenue miles.
Cool.
Okay, what is your cost per trip? Do we know that?
I think we do not know that yet, particularly given that it's only been operating for about 6 weeks. So we'd like to give the service a bit more time to mature before we start calculating that number.
Okay. Did this completely replace the fixed route system in Wilson, or do fixed routes still operate in some areas of town?
Yeah, great question. In this case, this completely replaced the fixed routes in Wilson. Frankly, I don't think that's the right solution for every single city. For perhaps bigger municipalities, it makes much more sense to identify where should those sort of high traffic, high frequency corridors be prioritized for fixed route, and then where can microtransit be used to sort of fill in the gaps, maybe to improve coverage on the outskirts or to feed riders into that fixed route. One thing to be very clear about is that kind of philosophically for VIA, we are strong proponents of fixed route. We think it is the best tool for certain situations. So we think cities are best served when they really think about what the kind of best combination of the two modes is for them.
And I would just add for Wilson, we looked at that. We actually looked at, would we take down a couple of routes and route people to our fixed routes? And it just wasn't penciling out because, as I've told, you know, I have a car. I'm privileged to have a car and be able to move around. And Wilson is not traffic congested, so I can get anywhere I want in my car in 15 minutes in Wilson. It's not Charlotte at rush hour. We have a rush maybe 2 minutes. It's not. We don't have a traffic congestion problem. What we have is an access problem. And so what we were trying to do is enhance the ability of those that needed this service to move around quickly within our city. And so that's why we decided that at the end of the day, the way it penciled out, it was best to transition the entire system to on-demand. And I would agree with Olivia that that is not the right solution for every community. It probably is, though, for communities our size around the state. I think I introduced us as being the smallest fixed route system in the state, and we were only able to cover 40% of our city. You know, it would have taken a lot more resources to cover the whole city with fixed route, and we wouldn't have enhanced the service other than we would have been accessing, you know, more places, but you still have hour headways, or maybe even worse, depending on how the funding, you know, came across. So it's a definite, it was in our, we were thinking about that. And then at the end of the day, we decided to go in this direction.
Yeah, great point.
Can you quickly speak on the timeline from issuance of the RFP or the whatever your procurement vehicle was in this case to actual implementation in September?
Sure. I think, Roger, check me on the timeline. I think you all released your RFP in March, maybe the end of March, and then procurement happened like through the end of March, April, May, and then I think we spent June like contracting. We signed right at the end of June, and then the launch team did launch throughout all of July, all of August, launch September 1st. Does that feel right to you? I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all in all, probably like March RFP issue, September 1st launch.
Yeah.
Okay. How many square miles are you covering with the service?
28.
Yeah, I think it's like 28 to 30-ish.
Yep. And so, you know, and as would be expected, and we could have included this map, it may be incomplete. You know, there are areas of, you know, that aren't asking for a lot of service. You know, most of the service is in the core area where, and I'm talking about the pickups and whatnot, are where the fixed route were. But what you're seeing is are those connections out to the major employment areas that were not being done before or had to be done in a creative way with the county transit system. So this is taking people out to, for example, we have a lot of hotels and restaurants out at I-95, kind of lower wage service jobs, also out to the corporate park. We have a couple of corporate parks where people get access, and those were not on the fixed route system. So the density of trips are, especially the origins, are starting where the transit was already serving. And then you're seeing a density of trips out to areas where we were not serving. And those are mainly those employment areas. So, you know, one of the results that we wanted to see.
So just so you all know, we do have many other questions, and what I'm going to propose is that we stay on for 10 extra minutes. Anyone that wants to stay on to listen to the responses can. This will be recorded, and again, the recording will be posted on the website. Any questions that we don't get, again, we will reach out and respond to those separately, but let's keep going for another 10 minutes if everyone's okay with that.
I'm great with that. And I'll note before we lose people that if anyone is trying to look at the email addresses, I realize I've made a typo in my own email address. So there should be BLAHUT if you're trying to reach out to me. But I'm sure you could also reach Roger and Grona as well.
Yeah, we got to find you. So you just find us.
Exactly.
And find me.
Everyone can find me. Yeah, what are the other questions? I'm happy to stay on for a little bit.
Okay, but if anyone needs to sign off, we definitely appreciate you attending today. We'll just keep on going with the questions for a little bit longer. So how has working with VIA affected the trip cost? Are you able to parse this from trip costs associated with the pandemic? Sounds like we may not have enough information yet on some of those types of questions.
Yeah, probably not yet, but at some point, obviously, kind of happy to share once we get more data.
Okay. For visitors to town, would you steer them to the web-based approach so they don't have to install an app? Can you pay through the web-based interface?
You can pay through the web-based interface. And it's a good question about what I would direct a visitor to town to. I think nowadays people feel a bit more comfortable sort of downloading apps and then offloading them once they leave a place. So that's one option that they could certainly download the app. If not, frankly, I would probably direct visitors to make a phone call to book a trip. It feels a bit cumbersome if you're like a traveler to a city to sit down and find a desktop computer or a laptop to book a trip on. So I would say maybe if I were a visitor, like, using the phone makes more sense. But ultimately, I think the app is a kind of a reasonable option for.
And I think the app, Olivia, if I'm not mistaken, so when I've downloaded the app, if you're on the VIA system, that app works in other cities that VIA is operating. So I think, I don't know how, I'm not a tech person. I don't know how it knows I'm in Wilson, but somehow, something pops up that makes it branded like us. But when you go to the app store, you're downloading, VIA's app. In fact, there was a few questions about that. Like, is this the one that we're supposed to get? Of course, the answer is yes. But, now, you can actually use that app in other cities that are partnering, with VIA. So that actually makes it more useful than just, using it here in Wilson.
Yeah, it's true. You could go to New York, you could go to Birmingham, West Sacramento, tons of places, and you'd be able to use the VIA app.
So back to the fixed route, VIA immediately replaced the fixed route, or were both overlapping in operations for a time?
The answer is sort of. This is what Grona had mentioned. So Wilson was previously operating an entirely fixed route. COVID hit, and sort of Grona then was operating like a demand response fixed route, sort of, where riders had to make a phone call in order to book a trip. And then from there, we transitioned to VIA. So the transition from that kind of COVID spurred demand response to VIA, that did happen like a flip of a switch. But there was like because of COVID, there was like a little bit of a demand response window in there as well. I will say that in other services that VIA has launched, where it has been more of like a hard switch from fixed route to on demand, sometimes we will recommend running both services concurrently for a week or 2 weeks to make sure everyone kind of understands. Another key strategy that can be really good for launching those services is, like, literally, if you're running fixed routes, we'll have people sit on the buses, hand out flyers, help people download the app, wait at bus stops, really make sure that people who are on the bus regularly understand what the new service will look like, when they try to board the bus tomorrow.
Are the
I would say we would have definitely, if we were running our fixed route, we would have definitely overlapped for a couple of weeks. So we had talked about that. If, didn't know what COVID was going to do, if our fixed routes could be turned back on, then we would have definitely overlapped. That would have been the right thing to do.
Yep.
Are the operators employees of the city or employees of VIA?
In this case, they are independent contractors who are contracted with VIA directly. In other cases where, for example, I mentioned that some of our partnerships are VIA just providing the software to agencies or cities. In that case, it is often, employees of the city or agency who are using the tech.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that piece with the independent contractors, that was an issue that we had to work through from a compliance perspective to make sure all the drivers can meet all of the FTA requirements. But we did work through that, and we have guidance and guidelines specific to this project on how we could achieve that goal. So happy to provide more details if you have questions about that.
Yeah, great.
What is your staff capacity, number of dispatchers and drivers?
Is that like for Wilson, do you think, or is that for VIA?
Does not say. Probably just mention both, I guess. I know Grona's holding down the fort for Wilson. What about, I guess, Grona, do you have support also that's still helping you out?
I do not. I am the only one with Wilson Transit at the moment. I can explain that situation. The drivers that I had, they were given the opportunity to apply for other city positions. We didn't just say, "Oh, you have to go." Some did. I had one or two that transferred to other city positions. I had some that just took unemployment, and then I did have one that transitioned over to VIA. So now he's a contracted VIA driver. But as far as staff goes, I'm it.
And what about VIA for your staffing?
Yeah, so how that works is for VIA, I mean, we have call centers that are kind of centralized that are providing the sort of customer support and ride bookings on behalf of riders. And then we have the independent contractor drivers, sort of the group of them. And then, from VIA, we have, there's, me and Rachel who have worked closely with Wilson. There's sort of an operations manager who works closely with Wilson. He's responsible for sort of every single day-to-day operation of the service. And then there's another guy on our team who is responsible for sort of the commercial relationship with Wilson, helping them to grow the service, look for opportunities, like helping them think through how to use the FTA grant money. And so there's sort of 2 full-time dedicated folks that work with Wilson. And then it's really their job to help then pull in other resources from VIA to help the city. So the 2 folks I mentioned, Sean and Ben, they could bring in, people from VIA's product team. If there was product changes that Wilson wanted, they could bring in our data scientists, our driver growth folks, our marketing experts, our PR team, to help them sort of take full advantage of the resources within VIA. So there's sort of 2 full-time people who are like really thinking about VIA, about Wilson, and it's their kind of responsibility to make sure the service is going very smoothly. But then they serve as connections to, the 700 people who make up the VIA team.
Okay, we'll take a few more, and then, like I said, we'll wrap up at 3:40. Let's see. Can you talk about the transition process? What about the old buses, shelters, drivers, etc.?
So the buses are actually, we still have the buses. That's our insurance policy. Yeah, now keep in mind, our vehicles were actually many of them were ready for replacement. I know Grona had placed in the budget, Grona might have been 2 budget cycles ago to begin replacing some of those, and we put that on hold as we were thinking through, what there might be as alternatives. So, they're actually many of the vehicles are due for replacement anyway, but we did not want to sell the vehicles yet. We want to make sure that this is successful. We'll wait for, we give updates to City Council, so we'll let them guide us. But so far so good. They're very pleased. But that's how we're, that's we'll call that the insurance policy. I'm sorry, what was the other part of that?
Like bus depots.
Oh, those are still in place. So we have not taken down the signs. In fact, those signs you saw a picture of are still up at our bus stops. Those are very durable. And so we're leaving those up. And at some point we'll have to make a decision about, taking down bus stop signs and the shelters. In fact, in some places where shelters are, those could actually become the virtual bus stops. So, we don't have a lot of shelters, but, like at the community college, for example, there's a shelter that might be a great place to do a virtual bus stop. For example, there's some apartment complexes that have a shelter where we had a lot of ridership. So that again could be a place where, hey, go to the virtual, that be the virtual bus stop, which would make sense.
Okay, let's see. Back to the cost. What was the total contract cost for the first month? Are we comfortable sharing that? I know we don't have trip cost information yet, but.
So the question is the total contract value for the first month. Maybe we could take that question offline if that's a helpful thing to do.
Okay.
I don't have that in front of me.
Yeah, same.
How many vehicles are on the road during an average day?
The total fleet size when we launched the service was 10 vehicles, and they're all six passenger vehicles. And then we will be expanding to 10 over the next couple of months.
8, 10. Started with 8 and it's going to 10.
Yep.
You said 10.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
It's been a long day. Starting with 8, going till 10. Thank you, Roger.
This is a good one, maybe a good one to wrap up on. How do you handle COVID-19 safety concerns in the vehicles and virtual bus stops and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from a COVID safety perspective, a couple of things. One is that we are actually limiting capacity of the vehicles right now. We didn't think this would be a particularly good time to be squishing people into a van. So we're limiting the number of passengers that can book a trip in a given vehicle. That can all happen automatically through the app. It's very easy for us to change on our end. So that's one. We are sort of giving drivers, things like Lysol wipes, cleaning materials to keep the vehicles as clean as possible. In some services, we have installed sort of partitions in between the drivers and the riders so that they are not sort of sharing air and they're blocked a little bit more than you would see in a typical minivan. Roger, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think we are asking riders to wear masks in Wilson. If we're not doing it there, we are doing that. Cool.
That we made some branded masks that we were giving out to our riders. So yeah.
Cool.
And yeah, so you got it when you ride, you're supposed to wear it. Well, I think we're following the governor's order on that. So our drivers have to wear a mask for sure. Riders are asked to wear a mask, but I think what the governor's order said on that is if they refused, you could not refuse service. So that's where the partition comes. So there's a plastic clear partition that's been installed between the passenger compartment and so that passenger seat up front is not accessible currently for riders. So that that seat's closed off for now. And then we just ask that they wear a mask, but we're not denying rides if they don't have a mask, which is where that comes in. So that if they don't come with a mask, we can at least offer them one.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think just the other thing that you can also do is you can use the app to also sort of give riders reminders. Say, hey, wear a mask, please sanitize. If you're not feeling well, please stay home. So all of those things can be done to sort of make these services safe for riders. What we've seen is that riders have appreciated the fact that when they're booking a microtransit trip, they sort of know hey, I'm going to be maximum one of 3 riders in this vehicle. And so it's given them a bit of confidence and security as they've tried to book trips. So yeah, it's been really interesting to adapt these services to the demands of COVID over the past couple of months.
Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap up here. Obviously, there's a lot of interest, so many questions, great questions also. We appreciate the participation from everyone. What we'll do is make sure that we post the questions and answers, the ones that we didn't answer, we'll answer as a team and make sure that the document gets out to everyone. But I want to thank you all for staying late to answer more questions. Clearly, we should have budgeted more time for Q&A, but that's a great sign that people were interested in asking questions. So thank you everyone again for sticking around, and we appreciate you participating in our first webinar as part of the Innovations webinar series. Thanks again and take care. All right.
Thank you much, Ryan.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.